So the lecturer, who's the lecturer? I'm curious about this guy. He's actually the vice shamudi of Afro City International, Brother Omowale, and he has some interesting information to share with us. He's gonna have a lecture series, and that's number one. You're gonna be able to have some good information and ask questions later. So, Brother Omowale is a good brother, very dedicated brother, great organizer, but also great researcher. He knows how to find the right information that the people need at the time. And so when he suggests that we will have this lecture series, we're all excited, and we want to see. You all probably saw some of his lectures, but having a place like that for free, where people can come and listen to his information, well researched, and also efficiently put together, I think it's a blessing to have him here and do this lecture series. So this is the first date. I think it's going to be every other 2 weeks, right, from now? Yeah,
so there's 2 in February, the 2nd and the 16th. There's 2 in March, and then there's 2 in April. So a 6-part lecture series.
6-part lecture series. And also the next lecture, we're going to have a brother who's going to come with the book from me. I think it's
France Dedencourt. He works with Mama Baina Bello. So some of the texts that he has published for her through his, I think it's Thoroughbred as their company. Yeah, so he's going to be here at the beginning of the next lecture, just to let you know about Thoroughbred, his company, publishing, and also there will be books available for sale.
I'm sorry. We went to the book fair for kids yesterday.
I heard that was good. Yeah, there's a sister on my timeline who went. She took her daughter. She actually published a book as well, so she was there. I heard it was really good. All right.
So, yeah, without further ado, we're going to let Brother Omowale do his lecture.
I'm going to get started.
So, I'm the cameraman, so I hope I'm doing what I'm doing.
All right.
So it's already started.
It's already started. Just make sure the sound is good. All right. Hotep family. All right, so you all see the name of today's lecture, the ethnic cleansing of Black America and the Black immigrant paradox, right? So before I even get started, I just want to take a moment just to give thanks. So first and foremost, I have to give thanks to our ancestors just for really giving me the inspiration and courage to even, commit myself to this type of work and labor, on behalf of our people, knowing kind of like the threat that always puts us in. But that being still, I have to just give thanks to the ancestors for their protection and for their guidance. Second, I want to give thanks to my wife. You all know I work probably, 60 to 70 hours a week at my 9 to 5, so in order for me to even put together this lecture, it required me to kind of neglect some of my responsibilities around the household. And my wife, it was very nice just to have her support and for her to kind of like pick up the slack, because, I'm working late trying to, get this material put together. I want to give thanks to my mom. She came up last night. Y'all know I have a 1-year-old, so it's impossible for me to even work sometimes, like trying to, when she's there. But my mom came up and spent the night last night so that I could finish this lecture. So I want to just thank her for that. Of course, got to thank the MKA Institute and Dr. Asante for hosting us as an organization in this space, but also for founding this space. I want to thank AI Philly for allowing me to use our general membership meetings during the beginning of the year to put on this lecture series. I got to thank Brother Shamari, Brother Rich, Brother Elliot for extending their platform to me kind of in the run-up to this lecture series so that I could come on and promote. Give thanks to Brother Shaka Ra, who put together the flyer for the lecture series, and thank Brother Kareem and Brother JT, who came out yesterday last minute to do a sound check in preparation for today. So I just really wanted to thank all the hands who were just involved in helping me or helping us get to this point today for departure and to this lecture series. But most importantly, I want to thank you all for coming. I know some of y'all sacrificed y'all Super Bowl Sunday to be here. I'm just joking. But I do appreciate y'all being here. Of course, for this lecture series, donations are definitely accepted. Also, we are recording the series, so if you would like to purchase a digital copy of any of the lectures or purchase the entire series together, you can definitely contact me by email at omowalespeaks I'm sorry, at omowalespeaks@gmail.com. So if you're interested in purchasing any of the recorded content from the series, definitely reach out. And I just want to take a moment just really to stress the necessity, right, for us as a people to support, you know, the intellectual production, you know, of liberatory knowledge, right? When we look at other communities, you know, they fund their think tanks, you know, they fund their thinkers, right? You look at, you know, Karl Marx, who black people and white people worship to this day. If you look at his life, right, he wrote ideology, you know, for working class people, but it was funded by wealthy Europeans, right? He never like really had to work, you know, all he had to do was focus on was thinking and writing, right? So we have like the Molefi Kete Asante Institute here, which is supposed to be set up as a think tank. Think tanks need to be financed, right? The production of liberatory knowledge needs to be financed. You look at the Heritage Foundation, which spends millions and millions of dollars to ensure that white supremacy or white minority rule is maintained. They're financing it. There was a lady who recently passed. She bequeathed $43 million to the Heritage Foundation, right? So their thinkers, you know, their producers of revolutionary thought are financed. I think if we're going to be serious, you know, about our situation, then we have to support it. So I do appreciate everybody who is encouraged to donate and support, you know, for this lecture series, but also donate and support the Molefi Kete Asante Institute. That being said, I'm going to get started. So I want to start with just a quote really quick from Dr. Marimba Ane. I actually have two quotes here, one from Dr. Marimba Ane, the second one is from Dr. John Henry Clark. And this quote comes from the introduction to her book, Yurugu. And she says, "My chosen field is African-centered cultural science, the reconstruction of a revolutionary African culture. I teach Pan-African studies. This experience convinces me more and more, however, that teaching Pan-African studies well means teaching European studies simultaneously." Right? And the second quote comes from Dr. John Henry Clark. It's from his lecture, The African World Under Siege. He says, you know, "You do not understand the nature of their history. You not only must understand your history and how it's manipulated, you must understand their history," right? So when you look at this lecture series, right, each of these lectures are truly designed to aid, right, in that discovery, right? There's two things that we're going to walk away with from this lecture series. One, you're going to know more about yourself, and two, you're going to know more about your enemy, right? You read Sun Tzu. He says, to know yourself and to know your enemy, you need not fear the results of 1,000 battles. I think that sometimes we take a very reactionary and emotional response to the way that our enemy attacks us, instead of taking a very sober-minded, right, and thorough analysis, right, of the situation that we're in, so that we can develop, you know, better solutions. And that's really what is meant to be achieved by this this lecture series. So the outline for today's lecture, again, just to restate, you know, this is an evidence-based analysis and critique of white minority rule. So I think it's very important for us to understand that as a people, right, there's both a context and a continuity of struggle, right? And if we ignore that context and we ignore that continuity, then our best efforts, right, are going to be doomed to end in failure and frustration. So the whole gist of today's presentation is to put things in their proper context so that you understand the context in which we are fighting, right? That global context in which we are fighting, but so that you also understand the necessity of that continuity of struggle, right? So I've broken today's presentation into 4 parts. Basically, I'll start with some opening remarks. Then I have an introduction that really just speaks to Black America's commitment to the liberation of the African world, right? That's the continuity part. But then the context part deals with like the last European empire, which is here, America. I have a section that's the African world struggle in the context of the Cold War, and it ends off with the strategic use of Black immigrants to facilitate America's foreign and domestic policy. All right? Y'all good on that? Remember, this is an evidence-based analysis. It's not an emotional rant, right? It's an examination of their strategies and their tactics that they use to maintain their domination. I think that it's important that we understand that. It's not a sermon. All right? All right. All right, cool. So I think I want to just start the impetus of today's lecture. One, I want to clarify who I'm referring to within the context of this discussion when I say Black immigrants, right? So here in America, like we already know that we have, well, not even in America, in the diaspora, the very nature of the diaspora has always been Pan-African, right? We've always seen our struggle as one struggle as African people, no matter where we are. Whether that be Africans in Haiti, Africans in Colombia, Africans in Jamaica, Africans in America, that has never mattered. So when I'm talking about Black immigrants, that's not the context that I'm speaking from. I'm speaking from the context of the Cold War here in the U.S., right? Because this is a global context, and I'm speaking from of the Africans who came to America within that context, right? So mostly first and second generation, I don't even like using the term immigrants, but first and second generation immigrants. And I just want to start by saying that, like, as Pan-Africanists, right, we can't simply write off the sentiments expressed by anti-African movements such as ADOS without first interrogating, right, the validity of their arguments. When we do that, we become like the parent who's driving and you have your 2 children in the back seat and the one child hits the other child, but you see the one child hit back and you turn around and you correct the one without correcting the other. I think that it's important that we understand that context, because if we don't, I think that there is a serious threat to Pan-Africanism if we don't hold our Black immigrant brothers and sisters accountable, right? And when I say that there is a serious threat, I believe adamantly that we as African-centered or Pan-Africanist people, we have the better analysis, right? Our analysis is based on, you know, the scientific evaluation of historical facts, right? It's not based on some moral persuasion attempting to persuade white people to do right by us based upon data, right? However, if we are not holding folks accountable, we risk ceding the superior ground to inferior logic. And I think that that's really what this lecture is trying to get to today, right? So just wanted to start just by clarifying who I'm referring to, right? But also the importance, you know, of this particular context. All right. So the significance of Black America to the African World Revolution. I have 2 quotes here that I want to read. And the first comes from Carter G. Woodson, and the second comes from Marcus Garvey. Carter G. Woodson, in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, writes, "European nations of foresight are sending some of their brightest minds to the United States to observe the Negro in inaction in order to learn how to deal likewise with Negroes in their colonies. What the Negro in America has become satisfied with will be accepted as the measure of what should be allotted him elsewhere. Certain Europeans consider the solution of the race problem in the United States one of our greatest achievements." Right? So what that basically means is that the strategies that Europeans have developed, you know, here in America to deal with its Black population are strategies that are being deployed on Black populations across the globe. And I'm not saying that Black Americans are infallible. I think that the only thing that makes Black Americans unique, there's 2 things that makes us unique. The first is that of the African populations on the planet, we are the only population that has existed as a minority amongst white people. All other African populations, when they're amongst white people, they exist as a majority. The second is our length of exposure to urbanization, right? When you look at the dangers, right, of urbanization and what it does to destroy African people, especially in societies that are dominated by Europeans, black people in America have been exposed to that urbanization much longer than any other group of Africans. So when you look at the conditions in in America today for African people, it should serve as a precursor for what to expect for other African populations if we don't adjust and modify and do something about this situation. So when you look at the relationship between black men and black women in America, the same situation is going to happen to other black populations. When you look at the way that black people have been dispossessed of their land, of economic opportunity, of starvation, like all these things that are happening here where people look at black America and see us as almost like backwards and destroyed, I think we're just further along in the destruction process than some of our other counterparts around the globe. So I think it's very important that we examine black America from that regard, right? Second quote that I have here, it comes from Garvey. He says, "The American Negroes are the best organized and the most conscious of all Negroes in the world. They have become so because of their peculiar position. They live in very close contact with organized racial prejudice, and this very prejudice forces them to a rare consciousness that they would not have had otherwise," right? So it's just reiterating the fact that, like, I'm not saying that black people in America don't have like coons or like people who are sellouts or that like we're somehow better than other Africans. That is not what I'm saying at all. I am saying that because of our situation within empire, it has caused us to play a significant role in this global context, but also if you analyze our situation properly, you can develop strategies and solutions for our situation globally. All right, so I'm going to move on. So Black America's commitment to liberation of the African world. Dr. Asante gave a lecture at the end of 2019. And in that lecture, he said that black Americans are some of the most generous African people on the globe when it comes to our advocacy and fight on behalf of other Africans across the planet. And he basically stated that oftentimes that generosity he does not see reciprocated, right, for lack of a better term. So when we look historically at Black America, right, and our political advocacy, I basically have here some just documented accounts from 1797 all the way up through 1897. Just this is 19th century, but this continuity continues into the 20th century. But if you look at 19th century, right, the first one, you have Prince Hall in 1797. You have David Walker's Appeal, 1829. The Fugitive Slave Law Convention, Martin Delany, Du Bois, 1897. When you read these accounts, you see that Black Americans have always felt a commitment, right, to the African world, right? We've always placed our race over our ethnic identity, right? And that has like not stopped, whether it be 19th century, 20th century, or even 21st century, right? So I just want to read some of these accounts before I even get deeper into the lecture. So the first one comes from Prince Hall, right? This was a charge to African Masons written in 1797. It says, "My brethren, let us not be cast down under these and many other abuses we at present labor under, for the darkest hour is before the break of day. My brethren, let us remember what a dark day it was with our African brethren 6 years ago in the French West Indies," talking about Haiti. Nothing but the snap of the whip was heard from morning to evening. Hanging, breaking on the wheel, burning, and all manner of tortures were inflicted on those unhappy people. But blessed be God, the scene has changed. They now confess that God have no respect of persons, and therefore receive them as their friends and treat them as brothers. Thus does Ethiopia stretch forth her hand from slavery to freedom and equality. I'm only sharing these contextual examples just to show that historically Black Americans have always seen our struggle, right, in America as one with the struggle of Africans everywhere else, right? We've never seen ourselves as non-African, right? We've always considered ourselves African, right? And when we examine the global African revolution or the African world revolution, we've always seen ourselves as part of that revolution, right? So this is an example of Black Americans' political advocacy. This comes from Sarah C. Fanning's The Roots of Early Black Nationalism. She's talking about African Americans from the North. So it says here, American black settlers were suspected of manning Haitian ships to attack Spanish, French, and Portuguese slave ships engaged in clandestinely importing slaves from Africa into their South American and Caribbean colonies. American sailors served as sailors on some of Christophe's first ships in the early 1810s. African Americans, it was believed by both white Americans and Haitian politicians since Dessalines, would pledge allegiance en masse to Haiti and its project of defending the rights of Black people. Black sailors were also crucial conduits of nascent Black nationalist ideas, facilitating unmediated exchange of information with the island nation. Right, so this is just another example of just Black people in America showing that commitment to Haiti, right? When Haiti's at war, and even when Haiti's a free nation at the beginning of the 19th century, you see some free Black Americans immigrating down to Haiti, but also making that commitment to fight with and to stand with and beside Haiti. In 1804, actually in Philadelphia, it was the first documented account of an organized protests to acknowledge the independence of Haiti. So free Philadelphians here in 1804 marched through the streets in military processions, and they even, in the article it says, roughed up a few white people. They ran up in somebody's White House and kind of like, you know, beat the brakes off of them. But like I'm just saying, like that history, that connection is there. So you see it all throughout the 19th century, all throughout the 18th century. So this David Walker's appeal, he says, I acknowledge that there are some deceitful and hypocritical wretches amongst us. He's talking about here in Black America. He says, who will tell us one thing while they mean another, and thus they go on aiding our enemies to oppress themselves and us. But I declare this day before my Lord and Master that I believe there are some true-hearted sons of Africa in this land of oppression, but pretended liberty, who do in reality feel for their suffering brethren who are held in bondage by tyrants, right? And if you look at the title of it's David Walker's appeal to the colored citizens of the world. It isn't an appeal to African Americans or the colored people in this land. It's to the colored citizens or the African people of the world. And even when you listen to the language that he uses, he says, you know, I declare myself to be a son of Africa. And he says that my plight is the plight of my brother's plight is my plight, meaning those who are still in bondage, whether they be here in the U.S. and Haiti, wherever they are, like it's my fight. That has always been the context of our struggle here in Black America. Some more just documented accounts. This one is probably, I love this one because it comes from the Slave Law Convention, when America basically tried to pass a law that anybody who is Black in America is a slave, point blank, period. So some of our ancestors had to flee to Canada, Harriet Tubman being one of them. For a moment, she had to flee to Canada or risk being enslaved. But those free Africans gathered themselves together so that they could document their position on slavery and for other Africans. And I want you to hear this account, right? I'm sharing their words. I'm rebirthing their words today so that we can hear them. It says, this is the letter. It says, a letter to the American slaves from those who have fled from American slavery. It says, including our children, we number in Canada at least 20,000. The total of our population in the free states far exceeds this. Nevertheless, we are poor. We can do little more than promote your deliverance, than pray for it to the God of the oppressed. We will do what we can to supply you with pocket compasses. In dark nights, when his good guiding star is hidden from the flying slave, a pocket compass greatly facilitates his exodus. Listen to this part. He says, candor requires the admission that some of us would not furnish them if we could. For some of us have become non-resistant and have discarded the use of these weapons and would say to you, love your enemies and do good to them which hate you. Bless them that curse you and pray for them which despitefully use you. Such of us would be glad to be able to say that all the colored men of the North are non-resistants. But in point of fact, it is only a handful of them who are. When the insurrection of Southern slaves shall take place, as take place it will, unless speedily prevented by voluntary emancipation, the great majority of us colored men of the North, however much to the grief of any of us, will be found by your side with deep stored and long accumulated revenge in their hearts and with death-dealing weapons in their hands. Right? This is free Africans sending a message to Africans who are still enslaved. And the free Africans are saying that it's just like I'm saying today. I'm not saying that black Americans are infallible and it ain't some sellouts among us, right? Like, cooning don't know no borders, right? We got plenty of coons, like, and I hate using the term. I'm just saying we got plenty of sellouts right here in Black America. But what I'm sharing here is just Black America as a group, our continued discipline and political advocacy on behalf of the African world is just so well documented, right? This is the second part of the letter. He says, and now, brethren, we close this letter with assuring you that we do not and cannot forget you. You are ever in our minds, our hearts, and our prayers. Perhaps you are fearing that the free colored people of the United States will suffer themselves to be carried away from you by the American Colonization Society. He says, fear it not. In vain is it that this great and most malignant enemy of the African race, right? He's not saying of African Americans. He's speaking as a race. He says, this great and most malignant enemy of the African race is now busy in devising new plans and in seeking the aid of the government to perpetuate your enslavement. It wants us away from your side, that you may be kept in ignorance, but we will remain by your side to enlighten you. It wants us from your side that you may be contented, but we will remain by your side to keep you and make you more discontented, right? And wants us away from your side to the end that your unsecured and conscious helplessness may make you the easier and surer prey of your oppressors. But we will remain by your side to sympathize with you and cheer you and give you the help of our rapidly swelling members. The land of our enslaved brethren is our land, and death only shall part us. Right? So this is them saying, like, y'all not sending us nowhere, right? Like, no, we not going to aid y'all in keeping our people like in slavery. Like, we're going to fight, right? And it's so important to note here that even during periods of retreat, they never stop fighting. They just changed their tactics of how they fight, right? But they're always strategizing and always understand that, hey, this is a consistent enemy. This is an enemy of our race that we have to contend with and that we have to fight, right? The condition, elevation, immigration, and destiny of the colored people of the United States. Now, this was a letter from Martin Delaney, written to black people in the United States. But what's dope about Martin Delaney, the second essay in this particular book, where they talk about their voyage to the Niger Delta, who's he with? He's with Robert Campbell, a brother from Jamaica. You know what I'm saying? So, like, this idea that, like, you know, we've seen ourselves, like, no, we've always seen ourselves as African people, and we've always seen that our position of African people is connected. That has never not been the case, right? So this is Delaney, where he's making the argument that, hey, the American Colonization Society is trying to send us to Africa so that they can maintain slavery here in the U.S. They're basically making the argument that if you are a black person in the U.S., you will be a slave. There will be no black people in America who are free. Free black people don't belong in this country, right? That's the history of this country, right? They try to do the same thing in Brazil. They created a Brazil Colonization Society where they said, if you are free in Brazil, you can't stay here because that threatens the institution of slavery, having you free black people around, because it makes the black people that we have enslaved and dominated, it makes them discontent. This is why even when you look at, like, black immigrant populations, they're always told by the missionaries, hey, stay away from those African Americans, because they're going to tell you some stuff to make you discontent. You understand what I'm saying? Like, they want you to be happy, they want you to be docile. But I want you to hear this letter. I'm documenting these accounts. These are all 19th century. He says, and this is Martin Delany, he says, the advantages to colored people of the United States to be derived from immigration to Central South America and the West Indies are incomparably greater than any other parts of the world at this present, right? He's submitting an alternative to us immigrating to Africa at the moment, right? Because Martin Delany, who's also the person who popularized Africa for the Africans, he created that statement. So he's not anti-African. He's saying that at the moment, strategically, given our condition, it may be better for us to immigrate to the West Indies or to Latin America. So listen to what he says. He says, the population of Central and South America consists of 15,240,000, adding the 10 million from Mexico, 25,240,000, of which the vast population, but 1/7 are whites, or the pure European race. Notice also when they talk about race, it's always that continental prefix in the front, right? The African race, the European race. And when they're talking about the African race, they're defining it as black people. Right? That's important for us to note. He says, allowing for deduction of 1/7 of this population for the European race that may chance to be in those countries, and we have in South and Central America alone the vast colored population of 13,170,000, and including Mexico, a colored population of this glorious continent of 21,640,000. Right? So this is Delany saying, hey, listen, when we look at Afro-America, when we look at the Africans enslaved in America, even if we discount, the 1/7, the very small percentage of Europeans, because remember, in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's the opposite. The European is the minority, the African is the majority. So he's saying, like, look at this condition, like, we are the majority here. We need to find a way to connect, right, with our brothers and sisters in Colombia and Brazil and Haiti and Jamaica and Bahamas, Barbados. How do we connect? This is what he's arguing. He's saying that, the advantages of us going to Central, South America, and the West Indies, like, they're incomparable. They're too many for us to even comprehend. The second part of this letter, he says, the vast number of people, our brethren, because they are precisely the same people as ourselves and share the same fate with us, as the case of numbers of them have proven, who have been adventitiously thrown among us, stand ready and willing to take us by the hand. What he's saying here is that history has already shown that our brothers from South America and the Caribbean see themselves as us. Why? Because a lot of us, the first stop that the slave ship made was down in the Caribbean. In fact, a lot of unruly Caribbeans were sold to America. So he's saying that as history has already shown us, we already have them amongst us, and you see that they're ready to stand by our side. He says they stand ready and willing to take us by the hand. He says, nay, they are anxiously waiting and earnestly importuning us to come, that they may make common cause with us, and we shall share the same fate. There is nothing under heaven in our way. The people stand with open arms ready to receive us. Will we go? He says, go we must, and go we will, as there is no alternative. To remain here in North America and be crushed to the earth and vassalage and degradation, we never will. Right? So he's making the argument again. This is, you see this consistency all throughout the 19th century of African people when they're documenting their account. They're saying, A, I'm an African. B, my struggle as an African is inextricably linked with the struggle of Africans throughout the world, and especially in the diaspora, because this is kind of like where their focus was at the time, right? This is the end of them. Now you go from 1797, where you got Prince Hall saying, look what happened 6 years ago, meaning he's talking about 1793 when the Haitian Revolution kicked off. He said, look what was going on with our brethren there. And what's so dope about that is some of the Haitians who, when the Europeans fled to America, there's a Haitian, a mulatto, mixed race brother, Charles Deslandes, leads what's referred to as the German Coast Rebellion in 1811, the biggest rebellion ever documented here in America. And what was their goal? They had over a militia group that was more than 500 people. That it contained the Maroons here in America, right, and people who they freed from plantations. They tried to storm the port at New Orleans to steal a ship and sell down to Haiti. You understand what I'm saying? So if you look at this exchange that's happening between us and the diaspora is consistent, whether it be like the black Americans from here in Philadelphia that are getting on ships and going down to Haiti, and they're manning Christoph ships and shooting at slave vessels, right? Like this advocacy that we see happening here in black America, this connection to the African world, it's just consistent. You can't even refute it, right? So this is Du Bois, right? And end of the 20th century. I always share this part. I know a few people hate Du Bois, but he was one of our greatest documenters. He's documenting our story. So he says here, he says, I will not say that the Negro has yet been given no message to the world. For it is still a mooted question among scientists as to just how far Egyptian civilization was Negro in its origin. If it was not wholly Negro, it certainly was very close allied. Be that as it may, however, the fact still remains that the full, complete Negro message of the whole Negro race has not yet been given to the world. He says, we cannot reverse history. We are subjugated to the same natural laws of other races, and if the Negro is ever to be a factor in the world's history, if among the gaily colored banners that deck the broad ramparts of civilizations is to hang one uncompromising black, then it must be placed there by black hands, fashioned by black heads, and hallowed by the travail of the 200 million black hearts beating and one glad song of Jubilee. Right, so this is Du Bois. He didn't say by the 4 million black hearts that are here in America. He said by the 200 million. And then he goes on to say, for this reason, the advance guard of the Negro people, the 8 million people of Negro blood in the United States of America, must soon come to realize that if they are to take their just place in the van of pan-Negroism, right? He didn't say Pan-Africanism at this time. He said of Pan-Negroism, then their destiny is not absorption by the white Americans, right? It's not some ADOS destiny where we're kind of like struggling to be made white. He's saying that black Americans here, like our role is in the van. Do you know what a van is? A vanguard? In a military formation, the group that is at the apex or at the front is referred to as the van. He said black people have to take our place in the van, right? Because when you look at the diaspora, who's in the van? The Maroons in Jamaica are in the van, right? The Africans in Haiti are in the van. Like this is the vanguard and the diaspora. So I'm just sharing this here that all throughout the 19th century, we saw our fight as African people. First of all, we saw ourselves as African people, and we saw our fight connected to the African people throughout the diaspora, right? And that literally does not change in the 20th century. I gave you documented accounts because I wanted to start there, but when you look at the 20th century, it's ongoing, right? So 1907, right, the Ethiopian church started here. The AME was the African Methodist Episcopal Church was started in Philadelphia, but the Ethiopian church that was started in America, those black Americans got banned from South Africa. Why did they get banned from South Africa? Because they started the Zulu uprising, right? If you read the documented accounts, they're saying, hey, these black people from the Ethiopian church are turning the black people in South Africa away from the white missionaries, and white people are getting murdered, getting slaughtered in huge numbers, right? This is Africans, again, from America, seeing their fight and their advocacy connected to Africans across the globe. Second thing here, 1915, you see Africans in America lobbying to end the African exclusion measure. What's the African exclusion measure? The United States government tried to pass a law that no black person that was not basically of enslaved Africans in this country will be allowed to come in this country. We defeated that. We said, no way, right? You look at the UNIA in 1920. Marcus Garvey and the UNIA attempt to raise $5 million. What are they raising this money for? To pay off the national debts of Haiti and Liberia. Why? Because America said, okay, we're going to invade and occupy Haiti because Haiti can't pay its own debts that it owes to the Spanish crown, and we risk the Spanish basically coming over here and invading Haiti. So as a result, America, we're going to go in and we're going to make Haiti our colony, right? So the black people in America said, nah, we want you out of Haiti, right? Like, you look at all the protests during that period. Not only did they protest the occupation of Haiti, Garvey said, we're going to try to raise $5 million to pay off their debts, right? You look at 1935, black Americans volunteered in the Italo-Ethiopian War. So when Ethiopia is invaded by Italian, you see this brother right here, his name is John the Brown Candor Robinson. Black America, what does he have on? He has on the uniform of the Ethiopian Air Force. He literally fought in that war and came back here to America, recognized as an African hero. You understand what I'm saying? You look, Paul Robeson, 1937, he co-founds the Council on African Affairs. What does this council do? This council popularizes a little-known group in South Africa known as what? The ANC. Not only does it popularize it and bring their struggle to the world center, it gives material to support to the rebels in the ANC who are fighting and resisting apartheid. Right? This is all happening right here in America. Malcolm X, 1964, the OAAU. He attempts to do the same thing that Delaney is trying to do. He says, when I'm referring to Afro-Americans, I'm not talking about the people here in the United States. He said, I'm talking about Africans from Canada, from Central America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He says this organization, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, is attempting to be the body that connects Africans on this side of the world with the body that was connecting Africans on the other side of the world, which was the Organization of African Unity. He said, we'll be this side on the west, they'll be that side in the east, and we'll come together as a united Pan-African body, right? Randall Robinson, right? 1984, launches the Free South Africa movement. And as a result, in 1986, America literally has to pass a policy against apartheid, right? So this documented account, like this advocacy over and over and over again, just not on behalf of ourselves, on behalf of African people, is undisputed. So when you hear Dr. Asante say that black Americans are some of the most generous, you know what I mean, in terms of our political advocacy, that's something that that can't be disputed. But I think it's very important that we understand that context, so that you have to understand now, well, what has occurred for this warm embrace to turn into a cold shoulder, right? We can't simply, write off the people who are being frustrated and lashing out at our black immigrant brothers and sisters who are here, right? So I think that we have to analyze that, and that's the purpose. So remember at the beginning, I said when we look at our situation, it has both a context and a continuity of struggle. And if we ignore that context and that continuity of struggle, then we really set ourselves up for failure and frustration. So I've just given you kind of like the continuity part, right? Like I've taken you literally from 1797 to 1986. Continuity, consistent, right? So the context part is equally as important. So what is the context that this particular struggle is occurring within, right? America at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, takes up the white man's burden, right? So now America is fighting two wars. It's fighting a war on the home front against its domestic African population, but it's also fighting an expansionary war where it is working to colonize other non-white people, right? But also competing with its European counterparts in that contest of colonization, right? So you see the beginning of the picture, you see that's Great Britain marching, the backwards races up the mountain of civilization. And right behind them, who do you see? you see Uncle Sam taking up the white man's burden, marching these backwards races up the mountain of civilization. But throughout their march, Black America remains, the militancy in Black America, the political advocacy in Black America remains the thorn in their side. Like, they can't get up this hill because these Black people just won't be contented and stop talking about race. They can't do it because these Black people keep attacking and fighting. So this is the context part, right? So again, the last European empire, right? It was Great Britain. After Great Britain fell back because they were overstretched, they had to pass the ball. Malcolm has he gives a speech. He says this white supremacy thing is like a game of ball. You throw the ball to the open man, right? So Great Britain and France, they was getting hit. They needed the open man on the court on Team White Supremacy. Who was that open man? The United States of America, right? So so this right here, this next part, now I'm giving us the context in which the struggle is occurring. I just gave you the continuity, then I'm giving you the context. All of this is important because you can't analyze the situation happening between the ethnic conflict that is being created by America in America, right? You can't analyze that situation between so-called Black immigrant groups and Africans who are descended from here without understanding context, because it's important. All of this struggle is happening in context, and if you don't understand the context or you ignore the context, then you're not really serious, right? So I have a scholar in the room, Brother Tristan, putting you on the spot. What's the difference between a faggot and a fasciste?
I do not know. I was wondering the same thing when I saw that slide. Because I know it's not faggot in the sexual context,
yep,
but I don't know the specific how it's actually supposed to be. So.
Does anybody in the room know the difference between a faggot and a fascist? No one?
One is a bundle of sticks.
She said one is a bundle of sticks?
The other one is, I think it's like some cross swords or something that you might think they're sticks, but they're really...
They are sticks.
Okay.
But you were very close. Our Sister Nabila Bay. I appreciate you for weighing in there. All right, so I'll break it down. The difference between a faggot and a fasciste, right? A faggot is, the dictionary term of a faggot is a loose bundle of sticks. In European culture, or just in general, this is even, the loose bundle of sticks is like 5 fingers. It represents weakness, right? Because they're loose, they're not together, right? Whereas though the opposite represents strength, right? So a faggot is a loose bundle of sticks. It represents weakness. It was a derogatory term in ancient Rome used to refer to women, because in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, womanhood was synonymous with weakness. At the beginning of the 20th century, the word is repurposed and used to refer to gays. So now people call gays, or in the 20th century, gays were referred to as faggots. But historically, the term faggot was a derogatory term meant to refer to European women because the women were synonymous with weakness, and a faggot, a loose bundle of sticks, represents weakness.
But that was based on their ethic and basis of homosexuality, rampant homosexuality.
Agreed.
In the Greek society.
Agreed. So I think I think that's important to note, right? Cultural context here. Within European culture, within ancient Greece and ancient Rome, like you said, with like the high level of homosexuality within the culture, women were perceived as the weaker sex. In fact, Dr. Tommy Curry, if you read his work, he analyzes 19th century ethnologists who were basically documenting white supremacy, and their critique of non-white communities was that these communities are lesser than us because they don't have any difference between their male and female population. The male and female are on the same level. So as a result, that represents a community that is not civilized. Whereas though in their culture, the woman is debased, the woman is demoralized, right? So the term faggot in their culture was a term that was used for women because, again, in their culture, womanhood is synonymous with weakness, and a faggot, a loose bundle of sticks, represents weakness. The opposite of a faggot is what's referred to as a fasciste. Now, a fasciste is a tightly bound bundle of sticks, and it represents strength. In ancient Rome, you see this guy standing here, he's holding what's referred to as a fascis. It's a tightly bound bundle of sticks, but on it, it has the axe. Now, not all the time does the fascis have the axe. They only put the axe on the fascis when it's time for them to flex muscle, right? If y'all ever seen the movie Spartacus, right? When they sent Marcus Crassus after the slave Spartacus, what did they give him to go after Spartacus with? They gave him a fascis, but on the front of the fascis was an axe. Right, so this tightly bound bundle of sticks represents strength, and it was carried by Roman rulers representing their power to kill and subjugate any peoples who resist the authority of the Roman Empire. Right, so now I'm telling you here context, right? I'm giving you context. The last European empire, America, because when America falls, there will be no more European empires. They done. You know, as Elijah Muhammad used to say, that their days are already numbered. They understand that. They're done, right? So the last European empire, right? So when we look here at American symbols of white supremacy and empire, what do you see? On the back of the U.S. dime from 1917 to 1945, what was there? The fascis. I'm going to break down to you why they took it off the money in 1945. I'll break that down for you. That's in here. But also, if you look at the House of Representatives today, one on the left side, one on the right side, it's still there. You can Google it. So like they are saying this is an empire, right? When the British Empire, because okay, we clear on that? So we know the difference now between a faggot and a fascist. So if somebody asks you, like, we all know, all right? So, I mean, you see this, I just got this from the news. There was an article that said that what was the fascists doing in Charlottesville? Remember this white supremacist dude right here? He ran over somebody and killed him down in Charlottesville. Look at his shield. What does he have on the front of his shield? He has two of them. You understand what I'm saying? So when it's time for them to flex, they understand like what these symbols mean. Like they understand. You may not understand what the symbols mean, but they understand, they know, and they recognize. I'm giving you context now, right? I'm starting at the beginning of the 20th century, because what did I say at the start? I said, when I'm talking about black immigrants, I'm talking about that group, mostly first and second generation, that come to the U.S. in the context of the Cold War, right? And I want to analyze how the U.S. government is using them to facilitate both their domestic and international policy. I said this is an evidence-based analysis. It's not an emotional rant. So everything that I'm presenting here is going to be, I'm using their documentation, because the thing about people who are very strong, they don't got to hide. They document it. They put it all in front of you. It's all in books. It's in the Library of Congress. They tell you what it is. Are you going to analyze it? That's what I'm trying to do here, right? Everything about this lecture series is meant to teach you something about yourself, something about your enemy. Right? Dr. Marimba Ani, if we're going to teach Pan-African studies well, we have to teach European studies simultaneously, right? So you have to study and learn them, right? So when we take a look at the U.S. imperial timeline, this is from 1890 to 1990. I like round years, right? So I gave you 1797 to 1897. That's 100 years. I guess that's the money counter in me. I just like round numbers. This is the U.S. imperial timeline from 1890 to 1990. I didn't make these numbers up, by the way. So if you look at the imperial timeline, America emerges as the world's leading industrial power in 1890. They outpaced Britain, France, you know, all the old European colonizers. America emerged as the leader, in large part, due to what? No, 1890. World War I didn't start until 1914 or 1915. World War II, 1939. 1890 is because of slavery. All of the accumulated profits and wealth, the free labor that our people, our blood, our tears that went into this country made it in 1890. It emerges as the world's leading industrial power. In 1915, it emerges as a colonial power, right? So when you see World War I, right? And I'm saying World War because when they say World War, they're referring to wars between European nations, right? So World War I was a conflict between nations who had colonial possessions, right? So America has to be in World War I because it has now emerged as a colonial empire, right? Before they was talking all this good stuff about the republic for which it stands, and but no. This ain't a country. This is an empire. You don't understand that context, you already lost. But so 1950 emerges as a colonial power. 1945, it officially replaces Britain as the world's leading imperial power. And in 1990, at the end of the Cold War, this period between 1945 and 1990 is referred to as the Cold War. It emerges as the world's leading military power, right? So this is America's imperial timeline. This is what they refer to as macro. You got micro. This is the larger context in which our struggle is occurring, right? So if you engage in the fight, but you got this side of your eye, you got one eye just blind, you're going to lose every time. Like I said, there's a context and a continuity of struggle, and if you ignore it, then your best efforts are doomed to failure and frustration. Right? The crisis that we see happening between so-called immigrant populations and black Americans right now is occurring in that context. So this is the first thing I want to do is present that context to you. So we know 1885, you have the Berlin Conference. All of the European nations are there with the exception of one. Who's that nation? America. America is not there. America is kept out of Africa, but America being kept out by the old European nations or the old European powers puts America in a situation where their economic and industrial interests are threatened, right? So I'm going to read this here to you. The United States becomes a world power. You mind if I take a quick sip of water? Ma'at.
Not egalitarian.
Hey, y'all don't know, we have the good Dr. Brother Cambone here on the 19th, and whenever he says ma'at, he had the audience say it's not egalitarianism. So I'm going to start, that was my refresher. Ma'at? It's not egalitarianism. Okay, so by 1819, the United States had by far the world's most productive economy. American industry produced twice as much as its closest competitor, Britain. But the United States was not a great military or diplomatic power. Its army numbered less than 30,000 troops, and its navy had only about 10,000 seamen. Britain's army was 5 times the size of its American counterpart, and its navy was 10 times bigger. The United States military was small because the country was situated between 2 large oceans and was surrounded by weak or friendly nations. It faced no serious military threats and had little interest in asserting military power overseas. It says, from the Civil War until the 1890s, most Americans had little interest in territorial expansion. The reason why he says from the Civil War is because prior to the Civil War, there was a huge philosophical debate. And this debate is documented in a book that was written in 1920. It's called The Cotton Kingdom. It was written by America's greatest white historian of the 20th century. But Google this book. The book is called The Cotton Kingdom. It documents the philosophical accounts that were occurring where they were trying to transition America basically into the new Rome, for it to be a population of slaves and land-holding free people. That's what America was meant to be, because they said, hey, we can't get rid of these black people. Let's make them just serve us forever. Right? That was the debate that was going on before the Civil War, but also the debate that was occurring was expansion. They were talking about expanding west, but also expanding down into Latin America. In fact, some what they refer to as enterprising white Americans were already arming their own vessels and ships, going down to Cuba and raiding and basically doing what Europeans do. You know, stake their claim to the land. Like that's what they were doing, right? So that's why it says here, from the Civil War until the 1890s, most Americans had little interest in territorial expansion, because pre-Civil War, the majority of wealth-holding Americans, wealth-holding landowners in America, had a great interest in territorial expansion. The Civil War kind of like put the brakes on that. So it says, America resisted expansion for two major reasons. This is just rhetoric. The source, I have the source at the bottom of the slides, but this source is Minson McNeil. They have a digital history of America broken down into timelines. So if you want it, you can go online and find it. But it says, America's resisted expansion for two major reasons. One was that imperial rule seemed inconsistent with Americans' Republican principles. The other was that the United States was uninterested in acquiring people with different cultures, languages, and religions, right? So he said the first reason they resisted is because, hey, this is to the republic for which it stands. We aren't an empire. Like, we revolted to break away from an empire. Like, you know, like, so we're not an empire, right? We are a country. We are a great country, right? So that was the first reason. The second reason is that we are a white country. We ain't trying to bring all these, you know, chinks and spics and niggas and wetbacks. You know, this is their language. I'm giving you their language. They're saying this is the reason why we are resisting expanding, because we don't want these other cultures here in the U.S. That's the reason why today, when you have a president who's manning over the empire, he's trying to protect the home front by, okay, ban Nigeria, ban these Muslims, ban these Hispanics, but he's also trying to expand the empire, right? So you say, okay, we're still going to be an empire, right? Donald Trump or whatever president is in play, they cool with it being an empire, but they want you to understand that it's a white empire. You understand what I'm saying? So it says, by the mid-1890s, a shift had taken place in American attitudes towards expansion that was sparked partly by the European scramble for empire. For empire, meaning the European scramble for Africa. It says, between 1870 and 1900, the European power seized 10 million square miles of territory in Africa and Asia, a fifth of the world's landmass. About 150 million people were subjected to colonial rule. In the United States, a growing number of policymakers, bankers, manufacturers, and trade unions grew fearful that the country might be closed out in the struggle for global markets and raw materials, right? So America's economic supremacy was threatened. Remember, I told you in 1890, they emerged as the leading industrial power in the world. But what just occurred, 1885, there's the Berlin Conference. America isn't there. Between 1885 and 1915, the European powers colonized the entirety of Africa, with the exception, and there's a huge asterisk by the exception, with the exception of Ethiopia, right? Liberia and Sierra Leone were already colonies. They were colonies. Sierra Leone was set up by the British so that they can reward the, not reward, but I guess you could say reward the black people who fought with Britain, not Great Britain, the black people who fought with Britain during the Revolutionary War. So the black Americans who turned their back on America and sided with Britain to get their freedom, their reward was they were given Sierra Leone. Liberia was a country that was created by the American Colonization Society for the purpose of sending free black people so that slavery would be protected in the United States. So these were both colonies. One was created by America, one was created by Britain. So the entirety of the African continent had been colonized, right? So it forces America to get into the game. America got to get off the bench, because America is closed out. So these are all political cartoons that you see happening at the beginning of the 20th century. So y'all know who that is in the middle, right? It's Uncle Sam, right? This was an article, a picture, a political cartoon ran in the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's Uncle Sam, and the table he's standing on says Army and Navy. It's him dancing with his new colonial possessions, right? So 1893, they invade and take Hawaii. 1898, they invade and take Puerto Rico. 1898, they invade and take Cuba. Cuba was de facto colony until the Bay of Pigs and the revolution that occurred, and the Cubans freed themselves, which is why they are hated in America. 1899, they invade and take the Philippines. 1915, they invade and they take Haiti. Haiti again becomes a de facto colony of the United States. I mentioned the Philippines. I want to just, again, this kind of like when we talked about the black Americans in the 19th century who were manning ships for the Haitians and shooting down slave vessels, right, who were manning Christophe's naval vessels. You see the same thing in the 20th century. You see black Americans going to Ethiopia, putting on Ethiopian Air Force uniform. This brother right here, who knows who this brother is? This is David Fagan. Write down the name, research David Fagan. That's cool. This is David Fagan. Write down her name and research David Fagan. David Fagan is an African American who served the U.S. military during the invasion of the Philippines. He basically defected from the military and went and set up guerrilla military units in the Philippines to fight against America. Right? Never captured. I think they even probably tried to make like a movie about him, but this dude is a hero in the Philippines. This is a black American who defected from the U.S. military and fought alongside the Filipino people who were being colonized by America, right? So our generosity, you know, we don't just extend it to black people. We extend it to the Palestinians, you know what I mean? To the like whoever, because we are anti-colonial at heart. So anybody that is being colonized, like we ain't with it. You understand what I'm saying? So I wanted to share that. This is a political cartoon that ran at the beginning of the 20th century. The context here at the bottom, it says school begins, right? So you first had, you know, Uncle Sam conquering, you know, these new nations. Then it says school begins, right? This is the miseducation. So the pupils you see in the front seat, you see the Philippines, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. You know, Uncle Sam, this is the miseducation part starts. And you look over by the door, you see a Native American, you know, reading a book upside down. You look at the window, you see an African American cleaning the house. And if you look who's coming into the door next, it's China. It's symbolizing that America, the next country we're about to take is now in China. But we know in 1911, we know what happened in China, right? They got them up out of there. So this is referred to in American history. Now remember, the context right here, right? I'm giving you the last American empire. I'm sorry, the last European empire. So this is context. Context is very important. This right here is referred to as the era of big stick diplomacy or gunboat diplomacy. This is Woodrow Wilson passing his policies to the president who came in after him, who was Taft. And this is a quote from Woodrow Wilson at the bottom. It says, "I'm going to teach these South American republics to elect good men." You know what I mean? And if you see the little bellboy right there, what is he carrying? He's carrying a big stick, right? Because America is using its military might to basically get as many colonial possessions as it can, because its place in the market is threatened because they've been closed out of Africa. Whoever controls Africa controls the world. So the Europeans say, ain't no way we gonna let some niggas control Africa. That's how they think. Ain't no way we gonna let black people control Africa, because whoever controls Africa controls the world. And African people globally will suffer as long as Africa is controlled by non-African interests. And I didn't say African people, I said by non-African interests, because all the nations and the leaders of Africa right now are pursuing, they're what's referred to as good men, right? Where Wilson says, I'm going to teach the South American republics to elect good men. How do we define good men? Good men are leaders who are puppets who advance the economic agenda of empire. If you're not that, then we need regime change. And we're going to put good men in play, right? So U.S. economic interests and military conquest. To enforce order, forestall foreign invention, and protect U.S. economic interests, the United States intervened in the Caribbean and Central America some 20 times over the next quarter century, namely in Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Panama. Each intervention followed a common pattern. After intervening to restore order, U.S. forces became embroiled in the country's internal political disputes. Before exiting, the United States would train and fund the police force. Look what they're doing in Haiti right now, right? They're bringing over the Haitians to Texas to train them. It says that they would train and fund the police force and military to maintain order, and would sponsor an election intended to put into power a strong leader supportive of American interests. Unfortunately, the men who took power in many of these countries, such as Anastasio in Nicaragua, Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, and Duvalier in Haiti, established despotic rule. What does he mean by that? It means they killed their people. Anybody who tried to resist American interests were slaughtered, and America financed it, right? We trained the soldiers, we financed them, and we put a leader in play, and any other people who try to resist to say, hey, we're starving. We can't eat, we can't feed ourselves, you're taking our land, We can't even breathe on this earth, right? Anybody who tried to resist the puppet who America put in place used the American trained and funded military to slaughter their people. That's why all of the African nations today have militaries, but none of them are engaging in external war. All of their militaries are used to repress their own people, right? Because they have good men in leadership, right? So you get the U.S. occupation of Haiti from 1915 to 1934. So a U.S. first invaded Haiti in 1891. The second invasion was in 1914. It says, in July 1915, a mob murdered Haiti's 7th president in 7 years, right? And we should say Haiti's 7th installed president, right? Why did the mob murder this president? Because he was a puppet and they were starving. And he was standing between them and their food. And when you stand between people's food and their survival, they kill you. Unless you've been Christianized and you believe you should turn the other cheek and die peacefully. You understand what I'm saying? Right, so it says the last Marines did not leave Haiti until 1934. The U.S. forced the Haitians to adopt a new constitution, which gave American businessmen the right to own land in Haiti. While campaigning for vice president in 1920, Franklin Roosevelt, who had served as the assistant secretary of the Navy in the Wilson administration, later boasted, "I wrote Haiti's constitution myself, and if I do say it, it was a pretty good little constitution," right? It says, many Haitians resisted the American occupation. In the fall of 1918, Charlemagne Perrault, a former Haitian army officer, launched a guerrilla war against the U.S. Marines to protest a system of forced labor, meaning slavery, imposed by the United States to build roads in Haiti. In 1919, he was captured and killed by U.S. Marines, and his body was photographed against a door with a crucifix and a Haitian flag as a lesson to others. This is the brother right here. Right, Charlemagne Perrault, right? U.S. go in and slave the people, right? Because in order for U.S. businessmen to make money, the country has to be industrialized. What are the conditions for industrialization? We need roads, and we need places to house the workforce. Who's going to build them? Not us, and we ain't paying nobody to build them, so we enslave the people and we force them to build them. You know, we can say, okay, this person committed a crime. Person goes in jail. Oh, give him some free labor. Go out there and build some roads. Right? This is the play. This is what's happening. Right? 1916. Right? I just gave you Haiti. Context is very important. Right? Because this is America. Right? This is the last European empire. Right? Between 1890 and 1945. This is America. But something changes in 1945. But keep giving you context. Punitive expedition into Mexico. So this expedition was led by General John Blackjack Pershing. This dude is the most decorated military general that the U.S. has ever had. The rank that they gave him, no one has ever even had it except him. He's called Blackjack because anybody who led an infantry of black men, those white soldiers were referred to, or those white sergeants and colonels were referred to as Blackjacks. So the Buffalo Soldiers, they were led by somebody who was a Blackjack. Again, I stated at the beginning, black Americans are not infallible, right? You see black Americans are going into Cuba when America invades Cuba. Black Americans are going into Haiti when Americans invade Haiti. And when they go into Mexico, who did they send? They send General Pershing, right? But also, you know, the Buffalo Soldiers, when America was invading the West and taking the lands from the Native Americans, who would they send? They sent black people. They sent black soldiers. You need a job, nigga? Go kill some Indians. I'm dead serious. This is, so you get people who, you know, who want to celebrate, you know, the Buffalo Soldiers with this. That's one mark of shame. But you know what? Domination produces shame. Domination produces contradictions. And we have to wrestle with those contradictions. So I'm not saying that black Americans are perfect. Because you know what? If you look at the Caribbean, the British also furnished themselves with what's referred to as the King's African Rifles. So you had Africans who were purchased as slaves to police. They were given a military uniform and a gun, and their job was to prevent the other slaves from running. This was all throughout the Caribbean. Google it. It's called the King's African Rifles. They used it in the Caribbean. They used it all over the African continent. The King's African Rifles. You can Google this. But this is General Blackjack Pershing is sent to go into Mexico to teach Pancho Villa a lesson. Pancho Villa was a revolutionary Mexican independence fighter who got a bad deal from the U.S., and as a result, he armed up and they went and attacked Texas. So that's cool. That's cool. I got you. So General Patton, first game notion. So the importance of the punitive expedition into Mexico. This expedition was led by General Jack Pershing. It was the first time automobiles were used in modern warfare. There's another general in American history who was the second most important general. His name is General Patton. He was also on this expedition, and he was famed and gained notoriety in the national press because during this expedition he strapped the dead bodies of 3 dead Mexicans to the front of his truck and drove them around until basically their corpses disintegrated. And the other significance of this particular expedition in 1916, because this is the expedition that modernized the U.S. military in preparation for World War I. Remember, the U.S. enters World War I, the war between European powers, the next year, right? But the U.S. was not militarily strong at this time. But this expedition was the expedition that prepared them. And if you see, right, this is, you see some black soldiers. They stand beside motorcycles, guns. You see a machine gun in the front, right? So this is these are the emperor's new clothes, right? He has all this money. And now we have a mechanized army. Before we had cannons and horses. Now we have motorcycles, automobiles, and we have machine guns. So we really ready to play. You know what I mean? So that was the significance of that particular conflict, because it prepared them for World War I. This is a tweet recent, 2017, Donald Trump. They always study their ancestors, right? They always venerate their ancestors. They name buildings and streets after them. Donald Trump says, study what General Pershing of the United States did to terrorists when court. There was no radical Islamic terror for 35 years, right? So they revere this dude. You understand what I'm saying? Du Bois writes an article, 1915, naming this article, The African Roots of War. What is Du Bois saying? The conflict, World War I, he says the conflict and the conflict to come are the result of one reason, Africa, the contest for the African continent. He says, as long as this contest continues, the world is going to forever be locked in war. So he says, Africa is the prime cause of World War I. Of this terrible overturning of civilization, which we have lived to see. And these words seek to show how in the dark continent, this is, I'll get to that, are hidden the roots, not simply of war today, but of the menace of wars tomorrow, right? Please read this essay, The African Roots of War, written in 1915, one of the most brilliant analysis of the situation at that time, but please read it. We go through what's referred to as the interwar period. This is the period between what's referred to as World War I and World War II, right? This in 1918 to 1939, when America enters, America goes through what's referred to as Great Depression. Well, the globe goes through a Great Depression during this time. But this quote right here comes from An Army at Dawn. The U.S. military puts out a recommended reading list for all of its officers and leaders every year. They update the list. This was one of the books that were on the list. So when I saw this and I saw it was pertaining to Africa, I was like, hey, let me check that out. But this book right here, it says, 2 years, 3 months, and 7 days had passed since the invasion of Poland, and the United States had needed every minute of that grace period to prepare for war. Churchill's chief military representative in Washington told London that notwithstanding the long prelude, American forces are more unready for war than it is possible to imagine. In September 1939, the U.S. Army ranked 17th in the world in size and combat power, just behind Romania. Right? We know we went #1 in the world now, but then we were 17th in the world. It says a Gallup poll of October 1940 found a prevailing view of American youth as flabby, pacifistic, yellow, cynical, discouraged, and a leftist lot. Right? But it's basically saying Americans ain't war ready. You know what I mean? That's what he's saying. Now, me, as a nationalist thinker, I look out at our people. I'm like, are we war ready? We definitely ain't. Not when everybody on TikTok and everybody want to be glamorous and glitzy. Like, when Mama Baina Bello was here, she said, no, a revolutionary woman just puts on that headscarf, no makeup, she's ready. You understand what I'm saying? Like, we ain't war ready when I look at the conditions of our people. We ain't ready to fight. You understand what I'm saying? So how do we get war ready? That's a different subject. But so I'm gonna give Brother Snooty. I'm gonna do 3 more slides and I'm gonna stop. Just really quick, y'all. I'm modifying the series, right? The first lecture, the ethnic cleansing of Black America and the Black immigrant paradox, I'm gonna do in 2 parts because of the time. So the second lecture would have been Garveyism and the renewed cry for African sovereignty. I'm going to put that one on the back burner. Maybe I might get a chance to do it in August if I have time, because August, as we know, AI, we're celebrating 100 years of the RBG flag, which was given to us in August 13th, 1920. So 2020 will be 100 years. So maybe that might be an opportune time to do that particular lecture. But I'm going to give you part 2, right? So remember, I gave us, this is a 4-part, this particular one. So the first part, dealt with, Black Americans' commitment to the African world liberation. The second part dealt with the last European empire. The third part deals with the African world struggle and the context of the Cold War. And the last and fourth part deals with how America uses black immigration to facilitate its domestic and international policy. So I'm going to get through the first half, the first 2 parts, and then I'll give you the second half on the 16th. But okay, so I just talked about. It'll be recorded. You'll get it. So I just talked about the interwar period. Du Bois, after the interwar period, America goes into World War II, because now they manned up. And when they come out of World War II in 1945, America is the strongest. It replaces Britain as the world's leading imperial power. So now America basically has gotten their weight up. But there was an issue. Militarily speaking, we still ain't really ready for war. We won really because we were financiers of the war, right? America really hesitated to get into the war for a long time. It basically was just financing Great Britain, financing France, like giving them money so that they could fight. But eventually we had to get in it because they would have lost, because Hitler was kicking everybody ass. Like because of what Hitler did, the independent struggles on the African continent were able to take fire because the colonial powers were so weakened by Hitler that they couldn't protect the home front and maintain their colonies, right? So the African colonies started to get free because Hitler attacked all of Europe. You understand what I'm saying? So this is Du Bois. So this is the period where America is trying to rectify the situation with them being a weak military, right? So, and this is Du Bois. He says, "We have gone insane with the idea that the world is going to be ruled by physical force. More than any other nation on earth or in time, we are spending fantastic sums of money to prepare for war and basing this necessity of war preparation on dislike and distrust and contempt for most of the human beings who inhabit the world. We have almost no men of intelligence and prestige who dare speak up for peace. Cowed and silent, we face immeasurable catastrophe, and the first duty of Americans is to realize this fact." Right? This is Du Bois talking about America has going on a crazy spending spree to beef up its military. In 1955, there was a panel called by Nelson Rockefeller. It's referred to as the Rockefeller panel. And in this panel, there were various position papers that were documented, and these papers were presented before what's referred to as the Preparedness Subcommittee. The Preparedness Subcommittee was overseen by Lyndon Johnson. But this one of the papers that were documented in there, this paper was only released, by the way, in 2017. It was a classified CIA document, but it was released in 2017. So you can actually go read them now. One of the papers was called "The National Cost and Policies Required to Maintain a Modern Weapon System," right? So they had to strategize, how are we going to force Americans basically to pay for financing this military that wants to conquer the entire world? And here at the bottom, the part that I have highlighted, this is really the official explanation of the Cold War and America's strategy during the Cold War, right? It says, "In the buildup and planning preparatory to a general war, the economic bounds of the two opponents determine the limitations in a military economic gain, and it is the successful play in this game that ultimately determines the strategy and the probable outcome of that war." So America is engaged in this Cold War with Russia, right? A Cold War means the opposite of a hot war. Hot war, you're actually fighting. A Cold War is time of peace where you're preparing for war, right? So America's strategy was, how do we outspin Russia so that we basically can force their economy into collapse, trying to keep up with trying to keep up with us. And literally, that's what occurred in 1990. Russia finally collapsed because they couldn't keep up with like the spending, you know. So that's what occurred, and this is what's referred to as the Cold War era of American democracy. Now, in the Cold War era, America has this face of what's referred to as a peacetime nation. America and Britain come together in 1941 before America goes into the war, and they found what's referred to as the Atlantic Charter. The Atlantic Charter is the creation of the UN. The UN, its motto is peace and security, right? So America is trying to present itself as a peacetime nation. So I can't use what's referred to as gunboat diplomacy or big stick diplomacy anymore, right? Because now I kind of like have a target on my back, right? The world sees me as an enemy, and I have to manipulate the world, but I still have to pursue my interests. This is when they create the CIA. The CIA is created in 1947 for the purpose of pursuing regime change in places that are critical to American economic interests, without America sending in troops. That's the sole purpose of the CIA and why it's created. And it's created during the Cold War era of American diplomacy, right? So this becomes a war really for the hearts and minds. Like, it's a battle between the Eastern Bloc, which is represented by the USSR or Russia, and the Western Bloc, which is really represented by America. So like the techniques and strategies that are used during this period change, right? Now it's public relations, media, entertainment, right? So we create, instead of America going in, we created this force through the UN known as peacekeepers. So we send soldiers on a peacekeeping mission. They go into Haiti. They rape the children in Haiti. They take their resources in Haiti. They protect the business interests of Haiti. Oh, but they're on a peacekeeping mission, right? So it's all public relations. It's all spin. But basically, I just gave y'all section 1 and 2. Really, section 1 just dealt with Black America, right? Because again, we have to analyze this to see, how does this warm embrace turn into a cold shoulder? Now, if somebody is feeling like they're giving and giving and giving and giving and giving, and you're just taking and taking and taking and not giving back, eventually that person is going to be like, man, fuck you. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to analyze that. So that's the first part. You understand what I'm saying? Like, so we dealt with the continuity, because there's continuity of struggle, and the second part we just dealt with the context. The context being America emerges as a colonial or imperial power, and going into the Cold War, now America has to change its perception in the world. And this period is referred to as the Cold War. So when we start the next lecture, we're going to be examining the African world struggle in the context of the Cold War. All right, so I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to open it up for questions.
So we're going to have 15 minutes for questioning. In the meantime, I just want to remind you, today we have the shaming ritual happening at the shrine, starting at 3. Yeah, I mean, good lecture. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand. Let's not raise our hands all at the same time. Put it in the back.
Yeah, so I saw you had a slide there that spoke of the silent weapons of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've seen the document.
Yeah, there's a document. So the slide says silent. The parentheses on that slide said silent weapons for quiet wars. There's a document. What they try to do is they write it off as a conspiracy document, because I think it was first made public. There was a book written in 1994 by a dude. His name was William Cooper. The book was called Behold the Pale Horse. In that book, he exposed one of the documents. The document is referred to as Silent Weapons for Quiet War. And it basically explains imperial strategy for how to attack populations without them resisting or knowing that they're being attacked, right? Because you don't see a military in your backyard, so it's like, oh, ain't no war going on. But if you look at the results of what's happening to your population, there's a war going on. You understand what I'm saying? So,
and secondly, Planned Parenthood is a part of that.
Absolutely. So yeah, so the ethnic cleansing of Black America and the Black immigrant paradox. I haven't even started touching on the ethnic cleansing part, but absolutely, Planned Parenthood is a documented account of an attempt at ethnic cleansing in America. Like that's not just in America, globally, because Planned Parenthood was funded and created by the Rockefeller Council on World Population. You understand what I'm saying? So this still today, like it's like the African continent has the youngest and fastest growing population in the world. So like all the billionaires are spending their money trying to figure out how do we kill a significant part of this population. Why do you need to do that? Because you can't have all these young people who are discontent. Ain't no jobs for them there. You can't bring them all to America and give them jobs. You understand? So like if there ain't no jobs for them there, eventually a part of the strategy that they're using to pacify them now is the rollout of the new entertainment class on the continent. So the goal becomes, okay, I don't want to be Thomas and Cora. I don't want to be Patrice Lumumba. I want to be DeVito. You understand what I'm saying? Like I want to be Burna Boy, right? Because that person is dripped in resources and all that. So the goal becomes, how do I become a playboy? Like not how do I like stand up and fight? So it becomes like a Hunger Games situation. When you look at Hunger Games, where all of the so-called groups are enslaved, but every year the elite in the capital pluck out a handful, and that person gets to compete in this year's Hunger Games, and if they win, they're dripped in resources, and everybody's goal was just, man, if I could only win at the Hunger Games. That's what it is. Like, we're all trying to win at the Hunger Games. Like, man, how do I be the next Jay-Z? Because Jay-Z, Meek Mill, they won at the Hunger Games. I want to be them. You know, so that's what it is. Yeah. Oh, man.
You know the memo, I think it's memo 45 or something?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you whether or not you believe that it's accurate.
Yeah. So you say the memorandum you're referring to was released, I think the Nation of Islam actually exposed it, and it was a memorandum that was released, I think in the 70s, where it documents the government's their documented attempt to basically maintain division between African people. The goal was to not allow black immigrants or black people on the continent to connect with African Americans, right? This is a document, yeah, but yeah, that's not a conspiracy. Like, yeah, so.
Because they said they never had it. They said that document was.
Well, they would tell you COINTELPRO didn't happen, but when the document's released, like, you know.
Our own people, I've actually heard our own people question the document as well, so that's why I was asking. And my other question, if you don't mind, so going back, there was this document that a acclaimed Aboriginal put up on Instagram, and it was saying that it was showing in the like a Louisiana newspaper how they had differentiated the African, right? So it had something where it said like mixed